URTEC is recognized as the most important annual meeting dedicated to unconventional resource. The conference annually brings together in the United States all the world community working on the unconventional sector, including operators, investors, and service companies. I was pleased and honored this year to deliver at this prestigious event a 40-minute conference during a lunch. Around 120 people attempt a speech dedicated to resilience and flexibility of shales, a topic on which I have continuously worked over the last 3 years. To start with, let's recall that thanks to a dramatic ramp-up of its shale oil production since 2010, the United States have strongly boosted their economy with nearly 2 million net jobs created. However, they have also drastically impacted the oil market with major economic but also geopolitical consequences. Thanks to the shale revolution, the world oil map is drastically changing. In 2000, the US imported 75% of the crude oil produced by Middle East, whereas India and China represented only 15%. In 2025, the situation will be completely reversed. In terms of numbers, the recent US liquid ramp-up is impressive. From 2010 to 2015, production of crude oil plus liquid petroleum gas has increased from 7.5 million barrels of oil per day to a maximum of 12.7. This is 1.5 million barrels more than the historical 1970 peak oil. Since this 1970 peak oil, the American oil production coming from conventional onshore and Gulf of Mexico, here in green, was continuously decreasing with a minimum of 6.5 million barrels of oil per day in 2006. Shale liquids, here in blue and red, have completely offset this decline and have given to the American production a second life. They represented in 2016 6.5 million barrels of oil per day, more than half the global liquid production. This unexpected ramp-up has enabled United States to divide by 2 their oil dependency in less than 10 years. It passed from 68% in 2006 to less than 35% in 2015. Let's now analyze separately the main cause of what is called today the shale revolution. The American Revolution relies on 4 pillars which don't exist in the other countries of the world. First of all, a very good knowledge of the subsurface with 4 million wells drilled since the beginning of the 20th century. The presence of many drilling and fracturing companies operating in a competitive and very open market, favoring a cost-effective model, a strong political support that has not varied with change of president. Bush, Obama, and Trump have all supported shale development. And finally, a very specific mining law. In the US, subsurface belongs to landowners and not to states, as this is the case in all other countries in the world. Shale production comes mainly from three champions: historical Bakken in North Dakota, Eagle Ford in South Texas, and, more recently, Permian at the border between Texas and New Mexico. Finally, shale production highlights two strong specificities. It's at the same time very flexible and very resilient. Let's try to better understand these two specificities. Due to the lightness of the means used, shale development is extremely flexible and can react extremely quickly to the variation of oil prices. In the event of falling prices, activity can be greatly reduced or even stopped within a few weeks, whereas in the event of a price recovery, activity can resume very rapidly. This great flexibility is highlighted on this graph, which put in parallel prices of the Brent with shale capital expenditures. The two curves are perfectly homothetic, with a strong increase in activity between 2010 and 2015, when prices are at their highest. When oil prices collapse in 2015, investments are then divided by 3. The modest recovery mid-2016 is then accompanied by a moderate recovery in activity. Resilience corresponds to the strong resistance of production to a drastic and rapid reduction in activity. In 2015, a dramatic and almost instantaneous reduction in activity was observed. However, contrary to the forecast of many experts, production has not collapsed at all. It has gently declined and has even stabilized today, following a moderate recovery in activity since mid-2016. To highlight the main factors of resilience, we have used the in-house Total UFDSIM simulator. UFDSIM simulates the factory development of a core area by calculating the required number of wells to be drilled, fractured and connected to reach and maintain a production plateau. The notional case presented here aims to produce a core area of 1,000 square kilometers supported by a portfolio of 1,000 wells to achieve and maintain a plateau of 75,000 barrels of oil per day during around 20 years, and then let it decline until the end of the production license, 30 years in the present case. We consider here a non-CMOPS development. The 10 wells constituting the pad are all drilled, fractured and connected before being put on production. Each well is supposed to produce according a similar isobacan decline curve with 50% of initial decline and 664 kilobarrels of ultimate recovery. To highlight the resistance factor, let's introduce the concept of critical rig count, namely the number of rigs required to maintain versus time a production plateau. As shown here, the 75 kilobarrels per day is reached after 2 years using 12 drilling rigs. However, the rig number required to maintain the plateau decreases significantly with time and the number of wells put on stream. At the end of the development phase, 4 drilling rigs only are sufficient to maintain the plateau. When the 1,000 wells have been drilled and completed, the production decline is divided by 3 in 10 years. The decline of a large portfolio of wells is therefore very different from that of an individual well. The UFDSIM model highlights that a large portfolio of wells drilled at different maturities acts as a shock absorber. The critical rig count decreases with the number of wells drilled and connected. Therefore, the number of wells is definitively a first resilience factor. Apart from the number of wells, operational performances, that is drilling and completion time, also appear as a resilience factor. Improving operational performance feed the well portfolio quicker, and further reduce the critical rig number. All other parameters remaining constant, 2 cases using respectively 30 days and 10 days of drilling time have been simulated with UFDSIM. The results show that with 30 days, 12 rigs are initially required to maintain the 75,000 barrels of oil per day, whereas at the end of the development, 4 rigs are still needed. But by reducing the drilling time to 10 days, the initial critical rig number drops to 6 rigs and the final one to 2 rigs. Therefore, drilling and completion performances appear as a second resilience factor. Improving the ultimate recovery per well appears as the third resilience factor. It relies, first of all, in the identification of high potential sweet areas which reduce mechanically the number of out-of-target wells. Given the large size of unconventional plays, these sweet areas need, however, to be considered as objects appearing during the development phase and not as objects to be discovered during a short exploratory phase, as in the case of conventional fields. Improving ultimate recovery also relies on completion design. It includes increasing the length of the lateral, the number and size of fracturing stages, the use of slick or crosslink fluid, as well as the optimizing proppant concentration and proppant ramp-up. In the UFDSIM model, this dual objective is achieved by introducing a production learning curve, switching from an initial well decline curve to a better one after having completed a certain number of wells. The simulated, presented here, was achieved by considering a production learning curve, considering that the first 100 wells produced 664 kilobarrels of oil of ultimate reserve, the next 300 wells 741, and the remaining 600 wells 800 kilobarrels. In spite of a limited progress of only 20% over the whole development period, the production plateau is extended over 4 years, while the critical rig number drops from 4 rigs to 2 rigs. Among the 3 resilience factors, identifying sweet areas and improving completion design appear clearly as the most efficient. The resilience of Bakken and Eagle Ford has been simulated using the UFDSIM model. Actual production data and development schedule were recovered. Then, wells were put on stream according to the development schedule, and past production was history matched using a well decline curve of the power law type as history match parameters. The quality and realism of the history match was evaluated by comparing the recovery per well issued from the decline curve with the actual average play recovery issued from the Wood Mackenzie database. Comparison between actual and simulated production from the 2 oil plays prove a remarkable history match. Quality control between calculated and actual recoveries is also excellent for the 2 plays. The calibration method therefore appears extremely robust. To test the resilience of the existing portfolio, we have then simulated a production decline over the 2015 to 2025 period, assuming no development activity, that is, no well brought into the portfolio. Without any development activity from early 2015, the aggregate production of Bakken and Eagle Ford would decline from 2.7 million barrels of oil per day to 1.2 million barrels of oil per day 10 years later. The decline curve highlights decline rates of between 27% in 2015 to 3% in 2025. This example confirms that decline of a large well portfolio has nothing to do with that of a single well. Apart from any technical consideration, The break-even price is another factor contributing to the resilience of shale. Among the three main American oil plays, the average break-even corresponding to half of the total recoverable reserve is equal today to $50 in the Bakken, $45 in the Eagle Ford, and only $40 in the Permian. It's therefore not surprising that more than 50% of the investment concentrate today in the more profitable Permian, whereas at $50, the Bakken has some difficulties to restart. Consequently, it's the ramp-up of the Permian that has mainly contributed to the strong resilience of the American shale oil production and has allowed to nearly offset the slow 2016 decline following the collapse of the oil prices. Let's speak now about the flexibility of the shale business. Like for resilience, it relies on three main factors. First of all, due to the very specific mining rules existing in the United States, shale is a fully private business. No need of long administrative process and approval of authorities. The decision of stopping or resuming activities is in the hands of landowners who can very quickly react to prices variation. As already mentioned, the second is, of course, the lightness of the means, which can be quickly demobilized in the event of a price drop, but also quickly remobilized when prices recover. Nothing to do with the inertia of offshore development, in particular those in deep water, requiring the construction of huge FPSOs. Once launched, a deep water project cannot be stopped and resumed. Consequently, end 2014, when the oil price has started to plunge, the drilling activity here, represented by the number of operating rigs, has immediately collapsed. Conversely, when mid-2016 the oil price has partially recovered, the number of operating rigs has risen again. The flexibility of shale development also relies on the possible separation between drilling and fracturing, with the possibility of putting drilling wells on standby before fracturing. Such wells are named Duke for drilled but uncompleted wells. As fracturing accounts for half of the drillex, which themselves represent more than 80% of the capex, Duke therefore represents a very important degree of freedom. The absolute value of Duke could, however, prove misleading insofar as, contrary to what is expected, Duke has increased when prices were high, decreased after the price have collapsed between 2015 and mid-2016, and started to increase again once the barrel price had partially recovered at the end of 2016. In fact, DUCs include two different problems. When oil prices are high, drilling activities is very intensive, and the increasing Dukes are the result of a stressed fracturing activity. On the other hand, when prices are low, both drilling and fracturing activities are reduced. The relevant indicator is therefore the number of Dukes divided by the number of active rigs. Relative to rig number, Dukes are low before the end of 2014 and sharply increased after 2014 price collapse. At the end of 2016, when oil price recovered, the relative Duke again gradually started to decrease. Finally, the flexibility of human workforce appears as a last flexibility factor. Historically, oil and gas is a very cyclic activity with a large workforce mobilized or demobilized depending on the level of prices. The shale revolution created 60,000 jobs between 2007 and 2014. However, since the beginning of 2015, following the collapses of oil prices, 25,000 of these positions have been destroyed. But since mid-2016, the new boom in the Permian has again relaunched the employment. The labor market in the US remains therefore extremely flexible, which is not necessarily the case in conventional activities outside the US, where massive job cuts were also applied. To better understand the impact of shale on oil prices, a quick historical background is required. Before the first oil crisis, prices were set by consumers, and despite an increase in demand of 6% per year, the prices remained constant at $2 per barrel. During the golden 60s, major OECD countries experienced an annual economic growth of 5%, owing to an almost free energy source. However, as from 1974, producers began to impose higher prices using quota regulated by the OPEC. In the blink of an eye, growth in the OECD countries was eroded, leading to significant public debt and mass unemployment. But in the early 2000s, following the growing demand from emerging countries, the market imposed itself and prices which were in the past disconnected align on demand. Oil has therefore become today a commodity like any other. Thanks to its resilience and flexibility, shale oil has greatly reinforced this paradigm shift. Shale oil has clearly become the new oil swing in place of OPEC and should, in the medium term, stuck the oil prices between $40 and $60. Although the collapse of oil price had an immediate and dramatic effect on development activities, shale production has proved to be extremely resilient. This resilience can be explained by three main factors: the portfolio effect, the improvement in operational performances, and the large progresses performed in sweet area identification and completion design. Regarding the portfolio effect, it's extremely important to realize that the decline of a single well doesn't have nothing to do with the decline of a large well portfolio put on stream at different maturities. As time elapses, a growing part of the global production comes from tail production. In particular, the resilience crash test no activities over the 2015-2025 period indicates that the aggregate Bakken and Eagle Ford production strongly declines over the first 2 years, but rapidly becomes resilient with decline rates of less than 10% per year. In addition to resilience, the soft equipment, the possibility of separating drilling and fracturing activities, as well as the very favorable mining rules in the US, make the development of unconventional resource extremely flexible. Given its break-even at $40, the Permian should, however, concentrate a large part of the future activities and allow the US oil production to continue to increase. All that also confirms that shale oil has become the new swing producer in place of OPEC and should regulate the oil prices between $40 and $60 over the next 5 years. Thank you very much for your attention.